Welcome to Kiss the Reviews. I'm Armando. Corey's also here. And we also want to introduce Eduardo Sanchez to the show. His, uh, his filmography, everything he's been involved in, it's a long list that includes TV shows like Dusk Till Dawn, the series Lucifer, Supernatural, Yellow Jackets, movies, obviously, The Blair Witch Project, Lovely Molly exists, and something that we just reviewed, Satanic Hispanics. I could keep going on, but we'll truncate that. You have a very long list of things that you've worked on over the years, namely which is the Blair Witch Project.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Thanks for having me.
oh no, it's a pleasure, and thanks for coming in. And I know that you probably get a ton of questions on Blair Witch for obvious reasons. It don't know if I want to say it kicked off the found footage POV genre, but I know it's that movie.
Yeah, it was partly responsible at least. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The
Did
Um,
you,
question, the
oh, go ahead.
question I had for you, when just going back, and obviously when we knew we were going to get this interview with you, I went back and I had to rewatch the Blair Witch Project, which, by the
mhm.
way, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, thanks,
Absolutely
man.
loved it, and it dawned on me because obviously, so many questions when it is your favorite. You got an anniversary coming up for it. Has that become like for you answering questions about the Blair Witch Project become like Radiohead playing Creep in concerts? Like they're just over it?
No, I mean, I mean, I understand, the whole creep thing, and I get it, but I mean, I always feel like I always tell people like, you know, the fact that people like you want to talk about Blair Witch. I mean, anybody wants to talk about Blair Witch. Like, why would I not want to talk about Blair Witch? Now obviously, doing 10 interviews in a day or whatever, that gets a little bit annoying, but repetitive. But I mean, I can't deny, the fact that people are still interested in this movie, and like, why would I be hesitant to talk about that? And I get that a lot. I mean, because I think it's kind of natural. Also, when I meet like people that have had, kind of milestone successes in their lot in their careers, you're always like hesitant to go there unless they go there. But I mean, I always tell people, look, if you want to ask questions about Blair Witch and talk about Blair Witch, why would I not want to talk about Blair Witch? And there's always, I mean, I think most people that want to talk about it have some kind of personal connection to it. They always have some kind of story of when they first saw it, and I just, I still get a kick out of listening to those stories. So I'm just, I've said this a million times. I feel blessed that I was a part of it. So the fact that people like you are still interested in asking me questions, I welcome them. So
Great. Here are my next 42 questions solely about the Blair Witch Project.
go.
I'm just kidding. I did have one question though about it that's been bugging me for years. Not bugging me, but I've always been curious about it.
Yeah.
In some of these smaller budgeted films, it seems like something has to go naturally. And it seems like a lot of the time, audio seems to be a real problem with the found footage films.
Mm-hmm.
You did not have that problem whatsoever. And one of the best examples of that is when, towards the end, when Mike's camera has dropped and you can hear Heather through Mike's camera, but you're getting her POV shot through her camera lens.
Yeah.
How were you able to pull that off for anybody else out there trying to make a film like that?
Well, I mean, look, it wasn't anything like any kind of creative genius or anything. It was just, it was just like, everything had to be logical. Everything had to make sense. Everything had to make technical sense. Like Blair Witch for us was like, since it was, we had never seen a movie like that, but we felt that like, we were kind of, trying to come up with some, we basically set off to make a fake documentary, and we wanted to make a documentary that like you couldn't tell was fake, which I thought that was, part of the, the part of the charm is like, well, don't give away the fact that you're shooting this, and have money and have lighting at night and all this
Mhm.
stuff. So everything in the movie, for Dan and me and the rest of the guys that were, doing this movie, was everything was all about realism and like not, using any kind of Hollywood tricks, or at least apparent Hollywood tricks. So, in that scene, we had a CP16, 16 millimeter camera, film camera, which is what she was shooting her doc with. And
Mhm.
the movie takes place in 1994. In 1994, if you were shooting a documentary, you would had to shoot it on film. That was kind of, there was no, I mean, there was, PBS was doing stuff on video and stuff, but to have any kind of like success, you had to shoot stuff on film. 60 millimeter black and white was the cheapest way, you could shoot a movie. So we're like, okay, Heather got a hold of some 60 millimeter footage, and now that's what she's shooting it. So, but obviously, if anybody knows anything about film, is that you don't run audio with film. Audio is separate. So, the whole time, Mike, who's the sound guy, has this,
Mm.
this recorder that he's recording, sound with, and they do the slate, and they, you marry up the sound and the video on the visuals and the footage, and that's how you get, film and video, film and audio. But she wasn't running, Mike was not running the deck, the sound deck. He was just on her, the camcorder. So the only sound source we were getting was from Mike. So Mike, even at the beginning, you hear Heather from far away. It's because the audio is all coming from Mike's perspective. And then that end was just kind of like, it was just kind of a cool thing that ended up happening with like this, how we, plotted out the ending, which is like, okay, Mike gets hit first, the camera drops, you don't hear anything, but you're in that, you're audio wise, you're in that, you're in that cellar, and you slowly start to hear, you hear Heather coming closer and closer,
Yep.
which adds to like, and then you cut to her footage and adds to that tension of like she's approaching the danger, she's approaching this, this place where Mike, something happened to Mike, he got hit, and it's the complete silence, kind of weird. So, it was just kind of like a coincidence, like not really a coincidence, but just a happy kind of technical detail that's just the way it worked out, but sound wise, I mean, we had to go back and ADR a couple of things. But we got lucky because technically we didn't really cover our, bases really, like for, if we never expected a big, theatrical distribution, but for a real theatrical movie, you have to have the audio separate from the video and all that stuff. So we
Yeah.
just kind of, we obviously had no plans of that, and we kind of, just rolled the dice. And luckily, that camera again just was had just amazing audio, and we lucked out that we got most of all those performances just raw on the first takes.
That's so awesome. I love behind the scenes stories like that. They just make it come to life a lot more, and seeing what everybody puts into it, especially with the technical things like that, and really laying out the details of how that audio is supposed to sound. And I love it.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah,
love
yeah.
it.
Yeah, we love it too, and that and that's really what, like, sometimes behind the scenes stuff, you want to see, if want to hear, you want to learn how they did it. But yeah, it's always the technical stuff is pretty interesting.
Yeah, when you're filming a movie like that,
Mhm.
and something that is, I mean, it's very raw, and I know with directors, you do different things to, pull stuff from the actors that are in the movie. Was there anything like out of the ordinary? Because I know basically you're filming in the woods. Uh,
Mhm.
was there anything that in those types of movies, that one exists, anything like that that you do that's maybe a little bit out of the ordinary to pull out that great shot or to get that great performance from an actor?
I mean, Blair Witch being, the kind of the most extreme, version of what we did. But you try to isolate. We isolated the actors as much as we could. We did this experiment that you can't do anymore because of SAG rules. The unions would kill us. But we had them, they were out there the whole time, they slept out there. Um, and you're not allowed to do that really, without, you have to kind of, keep it 12 hours. Anything over, you have to pay, and it becomes very expensive after 14, 16 hours. But none of us were in unions, so it was just kind of like, let's just do it, and luckily the actors were completely, gung-ho about doing this experiment. And so we kind of, that was part of the idea, is that, okay, we just leave them out there and like have them, eating camping food and having sleeping on the floor and sleeping bags and in a tent and being cold and being uncomfortable and not showering and kind of smelling. And, it's three people in a tent, and a really two-man tent. Um, you know, again, it's amazing that the actors, went along with it. I'm saying, it's just like, we were so blessed to have found them. But they trusted us, we trusted them with, carrying the weight of our film. But you just kind of we definitely wanted the film to be improvised. We didn't do any dialogue. So that was like the ultimate kind of, method filmmaking, like that. Let's actually make these people lost in the woods and try to like not contact them, and just try to keep the contact with them as minimal as possible. And then with something like Exist, we had, because Exist was supposed to be like a normal film, and then we late in the process, right, like a few months before we started shooting, we were like, let's make this found footage. It's just, we just made like this creative decision to, like, for a bunch of different reasons. And that one, you can't like tell the people, all right, we're gonna spend the night out here, and you're gonna do this and that. You can't do that. You gotta, again, we're all in unions, and the actors were in unions, so you can't really do that. But even though you have a script that was written, what I told the actors is like, definitely memorize your lines and kind of give us, there are some lines that are important, to like lay in the foundation for the next scene, or the scene that's going to happen, later down the road in the film, in the narrative. But I was very loose with the dialogue, like just very like, just make it your own. If you don't like a line, don't say it, just, and so every take that we did was a little different. And I would go in there and kind of, massage things a little bit, and be like, why don't you come over here, and this and that, and the blocking and all that stuff. But trying to give this, feeling of like, improvisation, this feeling of like real footage. But I mean, Exist was like, you know 15 years or six, a bunch of years, 13, 14 years after Blair Witch, and the found footage genre like had progressed, had evolved. So now found footage is a little more, it's a little more Hollywoodized, ever since like Cloverfield, which like made found footage acceptable to like the studios. There's very few films that don't use like the Hollywood tricks, what I mean? Like Paranormal Activity, I think, was a really good one, which was very raw and very real, and looked like it didn't have any kind of Hollywood tricks too much. At least I don't think, even though they probably lit it and stuff, but it looked very naturally lit or whatever. But then movies, since then, found footage movies are kind of have evolved into like, okay, we're going to light the woods, and we're going to do this, and we're going to have, music. Now they have music and, sound effects, and, and a lot of them cheat. Like, they have these, they have these camera angles that you're like, who's shooting that? Who's shooting that? Like, that's, kind of, how the hell are they shooting that? What I'm saying? So there are a lot of rules that we set up in Blair Witch that are now broken, and Exist was an example of that, where like we were, it was, again, many years after Blair Witch. It was the first found footage movie that I had done since Blair Witch, and I was like, let's, the has evolved, and let's just use some more tricks. Let's light the woods at night. Let's mic, properly mic all the actors, have a boom, pole there. Even like, we had the DP doing most of the camera work with the actor behind them, doing this, so, using like real cameras, like, very high, high resolution cameras and all that stuff. So, it's changed. But again, even in normal movies, you try to kind of give, the actors some surprises, and the thing is that, and not, the actors are used to that stuff, the people that are, professional, and like, they just turn it on, you know what I mean? They have this ability to, like, they're talking to you, or they're like joking, and then they're all of a sudden they're like terrified, and it's completely convincing. But you always try to give them a little extra kind of like, either a surprise, or take to take, you say, hey, why don't you do this instead of, or do something unexpected, so that the other actor can react in a weird, make it surprising for the other actor. And so there's always little tricks, but again, the kind of the immersion that we had with Blair Witch, you can't really do that anymore. Like, we have a film that we're doing, hopefully, knock on wood, this year, and it's like the closest thing to Blair Witch that we've done, since we did Blair Witch. And we are trying to do like this kind of, throw the actors in and just kind of give them these situations, and not tell them what's happening, and kind of, capture some of the craziness. But again, you can't, you have to keep it within 12 hours. You have to, like, let them go home and take showers, and, you have to keep it civilized. But, as a director, you always try to, when it's not, when it's needed, you try to, give them a little bit of surprises, and give them, but, again, most of the actors that I work with now at this level, they don't need that, they're,
Right.
they just, I call it, they're like automatic, you know what I mean? So.
Do you have a preference between found footage and, I guess, a standard, like,
Yeah,
normal movie?
conventional. I mean, like, I don't do that much found footage, and so you know, you kind of have. I mean, I never thought that found footage was going to be a thing in my career. Like, for us, it was
Mm.
Blair Witch was shot the way it was shot, because, like, as I talked earlier, because that's the way that it would have looked. Like, it wasn't anything like, I want these shots to look like this. No, it was like, well, how would these student filmmakers make a movie? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, I've done a bunch, a lot of found, not a lot, but probably, 4 or 5 found footage things now. And I'm going to do probably another one this year. I'm doing like a TV episode that's found footage
Mm.
later on this year. If somebody's, again, like with the Cloverfield being a good example, it's like at a certain point, you would throw the camera at one of the
Yes.
creatures and run the other way. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
but then you wouldn't have a movie, and the same thing with Blair Witch. Like, you'd run out of batteries eventually, or you'd be like, why am I, doing this? And you try to psychologically, in Blair Witch, we had this thing where, like, Heather was using it as like a, as a buffer to
Yes.
reality, and as a filter. And, that's true. You actually,
Mhm.
it's actually a true phenomenon. But, the, in, especially like Exist or whatever, it's like, you have these cameras where, like, why would you have a camera here? But it's like, well, if you don't do it, then you don't have a movie. You know what I'm saying? So, that's kind of limiting. And also, like, the idea that, like, normal movies can go anywhere, can see sometimes, the characters aren't aware of the camera, because the camera doesn't really exist in their world.
Mhm.
It's like, except other than like things like The Office or whatever, that kind of, mix the, kind of, it's kind of found footagey, kind of docu style. Most movies are just normal, and the camera basically just exists without the characters knowing it exists. It's like, it's like omnipresent, whatever. So you can obviously show things, you can show whatever you want. You know what I mean? You can go
Mhm.
internally and show the inside, what the characters thinking. You can do, dream sequences. You can do, all kinds of effects and stuff. With found footage, you're kind of stuck with the idea of, like, well, this is being picked, this is all being shot by a video or film camera that actually exists in the reality of, of the story. So it's very limiting, and even though in some things it's like, it's really effective, and it's very raw, and it's very, even nowadays, like, you watch something that's handheld and kind of found footagey, and you're like, your brain still clicks to, like, the thing of, like, is this real? Is this real? Like, so, it's a very powerful tool,
Mm.
And but I don't, I mean, I prefer the other, the conventional filmmaking, because it has more you can do more. You can, actually be I guess be more of an artist, be you have more control over the narrative, more control over the visuals. um found footage, again, has like its advantages, but it has a lot of disadvantages too, that you kind of box yourself into a wall, that into a corner, and you can't, it's hard to get out of and without cheating. So that's the problem with found footage. But again, both things have like their positives and negatives.
Yeah, I've always wondered that because from a writing angle, that's where I've always gone with found footage is there's no wiggle room. If you
Yeah,
find yourself running into a plot wall, it's like, oh shit, I'm stuck.
yeah,
Whereas just a
absolutely.
standard one, we can take this on the fly. Like you said, the actors can maybe have a little more free range to throw in suggestions, etc. So yeah, I
Yeah,
was very curious about that.
Well, and
Um,
you mentioned Satanic Hispanics, and that was a movie that we reviewed here. Which, by the way, we loved it.
oh,
Um,
thanks.
the the blend of horror and comedy is always something that I really enjoyed. The one question, because I know you've had a couple of, or more than a couple, collaborative efforts with other
Mhm.
directors on some of these projects. Is that something like where they just ask each individual director, "Hey, you just need to deliver this specific story," or like how does that, I guess, work on the back end?
Well, anthologies, are I mean, I've been a part of three anthologies, and they're all slightly different, but there is a level of like, it's not just like, hey, go make this movie and we're going to stick it into these other, there's always this kind of a little bit of a community, about like just what movies are being done and what the other filmmakers, and there's always like this kind of sense of like that you're making these films together. Sometimes the other the other filmmakers will like, you send it out there and they're asked, and you give them notes, because I think that, because so basically, the ones that I've worked on, we've worked very closely with the people that like are creating it, the producers, and there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of creativity to that, and you kind of have to manage the movies because you have to figure out what order they're going to be in, and then you don't want two ghost movies or two zombie movies unless that's what you want to do. So there's always this thing of like, okay, who's going to do what and how are we going to mix these. Sometimes people come up with similar ideas, and you're like, okay, well, somebody's got to switch it up because we can't do this. um but it's like, it depends, but you definitely, there is this collaborative kind of nature to the films. And there's, luckily we've had good people in charge most of the time, and they've they put the movies in the right order, and it's always kind of like this natural thing of like, okay, what goes first and what's not, what's going to overshadow something else, and we don't want to do this. And the same thing with Satanic Hispanics. There was like very serious films and there's very goofy films. um so you have to kind of manage that. You don't want to get too dark, you don't want to get too comedic. So I think they did a really good job as far as like, mixing them up. And then Mike Mendez on Satanic, who did all the, the interconnecting things. He just did an amazing job of writing and directing, like, putting all the segments together. I think probably one of the best, um, what do they call it? Like the segments, the connective tissue. Probably one of the best I've ever seen in found footage movies, in anthology movies. I mean, um, but so it's different. You know what I mean? And but every time you're kind of like, at least for me, I'm like, you know, you feel like this competitive, you know, uh, attitude where like, you don't want to be the worst film, you don't want to be the most boring film, like, you definitely want to step up and do something cool. um but that's kind of the big, the big worry as you go, because most, all the time there's other really talented filmmakers, and you're kind of a little bit like, you know, um, intimidated by, their other stuff and, their work. And you're like, man, I better, get in here and do it right. So, but we've been pretty lucky. We've been part of some good ones. And, Satanic was, I knew Mike and Alejandro, who were like the main producers, and, they're very, collaborative, and, they're kind of, they're good friends, and, you could kind of tell them anything, and and it just kind of came together, and they did a great job. I just did my segment, and um, you know was involved very minimally, but they really were the ones that kind of put the movie together.
That's awesome. Going back to what Armando was saying earlier a little bit with the horror and comedy,
Mhm.
they seem like such natural bedfellows just
Yeah,
because you're able to provide levity in these incredibly tense situations.
yeah.
Is that important to you when you're going into development or anything like that, to make sure some comedy is brought out if it's required, I guess? Or do you just kind of let the movie play itself out naturally, I guess, with the script?
Well, I mean, it depends on, like my segment in Satanic Hispanics is like, overtly comedic, like that was,
Mhm.
it was a comedy, comedy horror. But yeah, but I think that, I think comedy, you could use comedy in, in every genre. I think that, again, like to loosen the tension, to lessen the tension a little bit, to bring things back down. I mean, there's very
Mhm.
few movies where you're like, okay, that's inappropriate. Um, but even in the most serious movies, there, people, I think the audience appreciates these little, moments of like, oh my God, that was kind of funny, or these weird situations that are a little bit comedic and tragic at the same time. Dark comedy is that, comes to mind.
Mhm.
Um, so you try to, and you definitely try to, definitely add comedy, or at least a little bit of levity to everything you do. Again, unless it's something that just doesn't, just doesn't, is not appropriate.
Right.
But it all depends on, again, like, El Vampiro, which was my short in Satanic Hispanics, was like one of the, I mean, I can't even remember if I mean, I know I did some stuff, in film school and stuff that was like comedic, but it was really like the first, kind of professional, if you could call it professional, movie that I've done that
Mhm.
like directly, you can directly like point to, Evil Dead 2, when I saw Evil Dead 2 for the first time, and just kind of like just loved it, and like it
Yeah.
was such a fresh, and I was, and also I was, my history of horror is not like, I'm kind of a very fearful person. Like I didn't, I don't really love scary horror movies,
Mhm.
like I never thought I would be a, in the genre of horror, even though I'm very happy to be, kind of in it. Um so the fact that, this movie was kind of creepy and scary and messed up things were happening, but at the same time had this like comedic edge, was like just kind of a, revelation to me. And it affected my all my work since then, but I've never been able to like really, I've written some stuff that's like kind of in that, vein, but I've never been able to shoot it. So
Yeah.
when this opportunity came up, I was like, the idea was sent to me, a kind of one night in the life of a vampire. And I knew, I had been looking to do something with Hemke Madera for a long time, since we had worked on Queen of the South and we were good
Mhm.
friends. And so I was like, oh my God, this would be cool. Like, Hemke as a vampire, he would freaking kill it. So that was kind of, it was definitely like that, was the most comedic, like directly comedic thing that I've done, like, professionally, as far as like, being released and stuff. But, like, I mean, to tell you the truth, like, I think that, like, um, if you had asked me before Blair Witch, like, what kinds of movies are you going to end up making? I would have been like, well, like comedic action movies, or, either together or like separately, action and then, comedy. because it really is my sweet spot, that I enjoy doing. But since Blair Witch, I've kind of been, stuck, and stuck is not a good word, because, I feel blessed that that I have a career and that
Sure.
I'm able to do a lot of stuff, do a lot of different stuff. And the horror genre really, like, as you guys know, is, like, I think, such a popular genre because there are so many different flavors,
Hmm.
acceptable flavors, and as a filmmaker, you get to, like, do a lot of, again, you can do comedic stuff. Even Satanic Hispanics is like the perfect example. You can do something really dark and gross and creepy, and then you can do something completely outrageous and, like, kind of, the Hammer of Zanzibar, which is, like, just kind of in your face, just, like, morally, on the fence. And then, something stupid, goofy, like, El Vampiro, and then,
Yeah.
creepy, again, gross, there's all these kinds, violent, like, so there's so many different flavors to horror that as a director, you, like, as a filmmaker, you really do appreciate the idea that, like, oh, I can do this and I can do that. It's the most flexible genre of them all, and that's why, I don't feel like trapped. I know a lot of people, actors or, filmmakers, when they have a success with a comedy or an action movie or something, they feel a little trapped and they can't. It's hard to get out of that box. But I've been, I was blessed to, be stuck in the horror genre, and so been able to do a bunch of different things, luckily.
You definitely have a knack for the comedy, because we could barely get. I don't know if you saw our review of it, but we could barely get through your segment
Oh,
just
cool. No,
talking about it. We were
I mean,
dying laughing.
I appreciate that. I try not to read reviews. I just, you know, they don't. I don't do well with reviews, so I
Neither do
just,
we.
I appreciate when
Yeah.
people like my movies, and I understand that, not everybody's going to love them, but I just try to stay away from, for both, I don't like, because sometimes you, like, get carried away and you're like, oh my God, everybody loves it and I'm a genius. And then the other way, you're like, oh my God, I'm a piece of crap and, yeah, I can't make anything. And you just kind of, so for me, it's like, I just decided, and I, read and I heard a lot of people who do the same, like, just don't try to stay away from reviews unless somebody says, hey man, you got to really read this because they make a good point or whatever it is. I try to stay, but I mean, look, I appreciate people digging the movie, whether you're reviewing it or you're just watching it at home, we appreciate the support, and you make these movies for, we make these movies for people like you, for, the horror audience. And, it's very gratifying to hear somebody saying, oh my God, I really loved your film, or, we love the whole thing or whatever. So, I appreciate that greatly.
You got anything?
Armando, what do you
I
got,
just don't
man?
want to
I
keep
would.
talking over you, bro.
It's all right. Corey stomps on me all the time. So I guess there's two questions I have going back to me and Corey. Corey and I have been friends for a number of years,
Mhm.
way back. But we are very competitive as far as like our show
Really?
goes. It's who lands the best joke, who's got
Of
it's
course.
it's a lot of that back and forth. You'd say a joke, we tag it. When you work on, and I know you said like working in that community with the other directors when you're working on
Mhm.
anthologies, do you have, even with the people that you're close with or you're friends with, um, do you have that same type of competitiveness? Like, I know what you shot, I know what you're working on. I need to make mine just as good, if not better.
Absolutely. I mean, as you guys know, like, the whole kind of Lennon McCartney thing of, I think whenever you have two people working together, there's always going to be this, back and forth. And, we're all artists. So it's like there's this level of, like, I'm a piece of crap. They're so much more talented than I am. And then you talk to the other person, they're like, no, I'm the one that's a piece of crap. They're the ones that are talented. So, that's always good for a partnership, as long as, there's respect. And I think that's what, it's really hard to kind of walk that line sometimes. That's why I think most of the successful, like, filmmaking duos are brothers, because, like, there's,
Mhm.
Yeah.
no matter what you think, he at the end of the day, they're your, brother, and they're your family. And it's like, you can, whatever they think of you or you think of them, it's like at the end of the day, there's this foundation where you're like, okay, we're all right. We, it's just difficult. I mean, even, when Dan and I worked on Blair Witch, especially after Blair Witch, once the success of Blair Witch happened, our relationship, like, we haven't really done anything since then. Our relationship, even though we're still friends, there's a lot of kind of, again, and it's all ego and stuff. So there's a lot of like this, this thing that's constant struggle. Even for me as like a television director, like, you go in and you like want to prove yourself, but at the same time, at being a, this being so collaborative, like sometimes the best ideas are coming from other people, so you have to keep yourself open. And like, for me, like, I always love to get, I will keep it open for my ads and for my, script supervisor. Like, a great script supervisor, it really is a, a filmmaker. Like, so sometimes they'll say, hey, don't you need this or here, or what if they do this? And you're like, oh yeah, you're right, let's go. And I'll go in there and kind of take, try not to take credit for the idea, but it always makes things better, you know what I mean? So you don't want to like close off, but it's very hard. Sometimes you're like, I want it to be my way because I'm the creative, I'm the genius, So you constantly have to fight that. And then in anthologies, there is this competitive thing, but you don't want the other films to suck, because you're part of this movie.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is like, you don't want your film to suck, like for me, like my biggest thing, when we did VHS 2, which was the first anthology, everybody was like at least 10 years younger than Greg and me. And we were like, kind of grandfathered in, because it's like, hey, these are the Blair Witch guys. Sure, we'll bring them in. It wasn't like anything like, oh my God, we really need to. And look, they were, all those the producers, Brad and Miska, they were very enthusiastic about having us, and they were like excited. And there was nothing like, all right, well, we gotta kind of have to let them in. I don't think there was any of that. But again, like, you're like, dudes, this is our genre. This is found footage, is like, that's what we're known for. So we better not make the worst movie. What I mean? And for us, it was like, we didn't like fully commit until we had the idea, and then we were like, oh my God, yeah, that's a great, Jamie Nash, came up with this idea, and we were like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. We ended up making a pretty good movie, and in a really great anthology movie. I think like probably one of the best ever. You know what I mean? There isn't like a weak. I don't think there's a weak segment in that anthology. And the same with Satanic Hispanics. I think that they're all
100%.
very strong films in their own way. You know what I mean? But yeah, absolutely. I mean, that competitiveness is what kind of drives you. And again, like, I love the Beatles, and I think that you look at the Beatles. Part of the reason why they were successful is because there was this friendship, that they loved each other, but at the same time they were always trying to like kind of outdo each other, even though they a lot of times they probably wouldn't even admit it to themselves. But there always is this thing, and again, the Beatles reference. I remember when Dan and I were in the middle of Blair Witch, because you always have moments where you're like, yeah, I'm the man. And then other times, but most of the time you're just like, oh my God, I'm just trying to keep up with these guys. And, I was working with some talented people, and a lot of times, I remember having one discussion with Dan, and, we were like, man, this and that, just feeling, and we were like, I just can't help but feel like the Ringo of the group, not to downplay Ringo, because, one of the most brilliant drummers, and you look at, you listen to the Beatles and you're like, man, that his drumming was like so good and so creative, and like what he did, like, it was very, he was a great drummer, like, absolutely. But, as far, you're in a group with Paul McCartney and, John Lennon, and then George Harrison later on with, his songwriting, the Ringo is like, well, you're there with some geniuses. I mean, you're a genius yourself, but you're still you're still the Ringo, you've
Right.
accomplished so much, but you're among giants, you know what I mean? And so we were always like, oh man, I feel like the Ringo. And then I remember one time we were talking about that, and I'm like, yeah, or somebody, we were like, feel like the Ringo, and we were like, literally the other person was like, no, I feel like the Ringo. We were arguing about who the Ringo was. So it's like, that's part of a good partnership. And I think, like, we've had pretty good partnerships on these anthologies. So there's always this level of like support. El Vampiro to me was, I've been in television for like 10 years. I haven't done any kind of film stuff. El Vampiro is like the first kind of film that I've been a part of in over 10 years. But so there's like, for me, like television is very comfortable. Like there is this kind of like, it's very collaborative, but at the same time you can't, and at the same time you can't put too much responsibility on the director's shoulders, because usually the show is cast, and the writers are writing their own thing. You're not going to go in there and say, I think this character should do this instead of that. You can't do that. You know what I'm saying? You're part of a puzzle. You're a piece in the puzzle, and you can't, you can shape the puzzle piece a little bit, but you can't take it in a complete different direction. So for me, as far as like my ego is concerned, is like, and my, my mental health, I've always had this thing of like, okay, I'm just doing my best. I'm very open to like being, collaborative and really putting 100% of my energy into it, but also being able to step back and say, there's only so much I can do. If it sucks, yeah, maybe it's part of it is my fault, but a lot of it is, sometimes you're like, well, the writing was this, or the acting, they cast the wrong person. And I've been really lucky where I've been, I think all of the stuff that I've done, I've been very happy with like the outcome. I've been very lucky in that aspect. But again, television lets me kind of compartmentalize that part of my, of my ego. That when Vampiro was the first time and since exists where I was like, this is my film, I'm responsible for it. Like there's nobody to blame but me. Like I helped write the script. I did some drafts of it, and I edited the movie. I directed the movie. I brought the movie to my hometown and shot it with people that I knew, and cast it. I made all this. So there's this bigger responsibility. And honestly, like shooting El Vampiro was like the most stressful situation I've had in many years, and you look at it, the movie, you're like, oh my God, must have been so much fun. And it was fun, but there was this really crazy level of like stress that was the first time I had felt that since exists. And it's just, it's a difference between features and television now, and now I'm like, because of like, my track record in television, the feature stuff is coming back. There's a lot of people that are interested in me doing, features, and, kind of got, that little bit of juice again to be able to do features. And, part of me is freaking out, you know what I'm saying? But again, it's like, you gotta get to a point, you gotta face these things and like try to, make the best film possible, and not be completely, miserable doing it. So I'm getting there. I'm on some medication. I've been on some medication for many years, and just kind of trying to, calm this weird part of my brain that that leads to depression, and unfortunately, and so it's always this kind of balancing act of like trying to keep that at bay. So I think I feel like I'm in good shape right now, with these films that are about to happen hopefully this year. But again, the Vampira was super stressful. It really was. It was not fun until later on when I was like watching the movie and be like, oh yeah, this is a fun movie. Yeah, it's good. So it's good. It's good enough. It was
Yeah.
not, it's good enough. It's not a work of art, but it's fun, and people are digging. Enough people are digging it.
Well,
No, it was incredible.
yeah, I'll say this. I know it might have been stressful, but it was absolutely enjoyable to watch.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah,
Thanks. I mean, yeah, I mean,
according to us, it was worth all of your stress.
well, thank you. Yeah, it took years off my life, but I'm glad that we were able to capture it on film, and you guys were able to enjoy my misery.
Yeah. You brought up TV a lot,
Mhm.
and I was reading one of the rare times I actually did research. That's how much I actually respect you. I did research for this.
I know,
Uh,
I hate research as well.
it's the worst.
Okay.
I read that at Montgomery College,
Mhm.
you had directed a movie called Star Trek Demented. that the
Yeah.
school put on. And then I saw just recently that you directed an episode of Star Trek Brave New Worlds.
Yeah.
Was that like a full circle moment for you?
Yes. Yes.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a dream come true. I did this, like in college, in Montgomery College, we were all supposed to do these projects, separate projects, and it's for at a certain point, like it just started falling apart. The schedule wasn't working, and the teacher was like, "We got to do something." So I was like, "Well, why don't we?" I had this idea for the Star Trek episode that maybe different people can direct, different people can light it, different people can do camera. Like it's kind of like a project. And the teacher, luckily, was very supportive and was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I wrote this thing called Star Trek Demented, and again, it was like the Evil Dead, version of Star Trek, where it's like, and I love Star Trek. Like I'm totally a Trekkie. I'm also, obviously, you can see background. I love Star Wars as well, but Star Trek like was, at that moment in my life, that was my jam. It was like I was watching, I would tape it at night, the originals. And this is before, Next Generation. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was just like, yeah, this is late 80s. So right when Next Generation was about to start or whatever. But it was, it was just like, I loved it. It was like a labor of love. And, we did, weird, really cheap special effects. And we completely kind of embraced the fact that we had no money and, cheesy costumes and, and then, and the main thing was that our studio was like, in Montgomery College. Now they have a great studio, have a great setup. But back then we were like in the corner basement of the library. And there was this AC hum all the time. And you'd be doing like an interview show, be like all the time. And I was like, oh my God. So I was like, you could do like a science fiction show in here and have this, background noise work. So that's part of the reason why Star Trek came up, is because of this background hum. And then, many years later, but anyway, it's probably the most fun thing I did in school for sure. It was just collaborative and everybody loved it and everybody got involved in the costumes and it was really like very collaborative. People had so much fun on it. And it's on YouTube somewhere, but
yeah, definitely is. I watched part of it.
It's just a goofy, but it's just a goofy Star Trek parody. And then, years later to be able to like, get on the set of Star Trek and be on the, actually work on the bridge of the Enterprise. Like, I remember, it's just magical, man. There's so many magical moments and during that show. And again, stressful because like, holy crap, I'm doing a Star Trek episode. You know what I mean? Like I can't, I'm going to be part of this family, this thing, this that I've loved for so many years. And it was crazy, man, especially like on the bridge, like when, I had some, characters coming the beginning of the scene of people coming through the turbo lift, the doors open, and you're like, how many times have I seen that, in the original series and then all the other ones? Because I've seen all of them. I've seen like every episode of every Star Trek show, even the cartoon and everything. I'm like, and I can't believe that I'm directing a scene, with the turbo lift, like, and then and I've said this before, but I had this one moment where like one of the characters, because it was only the second season, and one of the main characters went into the turbo lift and had to like go and basically she was taking somebody to the sick bay. So we rehearsed it and they went into the turbo lift and we were like waiting for them to say, to do, you have to say sick bay back in the, the Enterprise. You have to say where you're going. And she didn't do it. So we're like, all right, cut. And so we were like, hey, and they were like, well, I've never done a turbo lift scene like this. So we had to like educate this character that, one of the main characters that, no, you have to grab this thing and you have to say, sick bay. So, to me, that was just like, just blew my mind. You know what I mean? That like, I was actually introducing this, very kind of basic that, and it's a Trekkie, it's definitely like a geeky detail that only Trekkies would know, would notice. But again, when you're directing a show, you have, all those little moments, you have to, be aware of all that stuff. So that was a really cool moment where, I was like, I can't believe that I was part of this first turbo lift scene with this actress, with this main character, it's just exciting, man. It's just, and everybody was so cool. And, just being able to work with, like the Spock and Uhura and, all these like classic,
Yeah.
Characters, even though they're new actors, like they're still, they're the essence of the character is there. And you're like, you can't help but think of, Leonard Nimoy and,
Mm.
it's just like, and it's weird because and luckily Anson, who plays Pike, didn't ever hear me, but I kept saying Kirk and Spock, because that's you're used to Kirk and Spock. That's kind of the duo. So I'd be like, all right, and then Kirk and Spock kind of go in here, and they'd be like, no, it's Pike. I'm like, oh, and so luckily Anson, didn't hear me, and and I was able to get together before, I embarrassed myself in front of him, but again, it's like part of my, part of like what I grew up with. And so it was like definitely one of the highlights of my television career for sure.
Is there anything that you're either working on or that's coming out soon that you wanted to promote?
Yeah, I've been the last couple years during the strike, especially, I executive produced these low budget horror movies, mostly horror movies. And it's the same company that did Satanic Hispanics. And we released a movie a few months ago called The Jester, which we're really proud of. And then we just released one called Last Night of Terror at Terrace Lanes, which is again like a comedy horror movie, which is, getting a lot of good reaction, just a fun movie. And we're about to release a few more. And so just, the Epic is the company it's Epic and Dread are releasing the movies. So, that's kind of the main thing that I've been working on right now, just, giving note. And I really enjoy like working with, the directors and, a lot of them are first time feature directors. And it's just cool to be able to like kind of help them out and, help sculpt the movies, but really proud of the stuff that we've done for, it was super low budget. So, you can't really, you know, don't expect a big budget movie. It's really, really like about as low as you can get and still pay people. Even though we pay them like very not what they're worth at all, unfortunately. But so, that's kind of the main thing. And I did an episode of this show called Hysteria for Peacock. And I got to work with Bruce Campbell, which is another kind of
Wow.
huge moment in my life. And that's coming out, I guess, this summer, but it's a really cool show. It takes place in the 80s about like Satanism, and it's kind of dark comedy, has like a nice little edge to it, but pretty dark as well. So I'm really proud of my episode, and I've seen the other episodes, and it's going to be a pretty good show, and hopefully it gets a second season and they invite me back. But that's kind of it, man. I mean, that's the first show I had done since, the strike. So I didn't work for like 10 months. So, other than the independent little features, I've just kind of been, stuck at home and trying to enjoy my, the family life and being here. So looking forward to getting back to work and just doing other things and stuff. But yeah, for now, that's kind of it.
Awesome.
Awesome, man.
Well, hey, for Corey, I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk
No
to
problem.
us and
No
go
problem,
through
man.
our-
I'd love to come back whenever you guys feel that, you want to talk some more stuff. So, yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great interview.
All right.
Well, my guess is we're going to be watching Jester and Last Night at Terrace Lanes here pretty quick. I know
Yeah,
Terrace
I mean,
Lanes is
yeah,
already
exactly.
in
Yeah,
my
and look,
queue. I
I
saw
think,
that the other day and
yeah,
threw it
they're,
in my
I mean,
queue.
they're fun. They're fun. I mean, again, they're super low budget, but really, really well, good for that level for sure. So.
No, man, we'll definitely want to reach out again. And I mean, we got your email now, so you're kind of
Hey, you got yeah, man. So if you guys,
Yeah.
want to chat some more, I'm always around. And again, like the Blair Witch thing, I'm always with any of my projects, like, I'm happy to discuss anything. I don't have much to hide. At this point. in my career. So, but
well,
thanks for
we
having
do,
me.
so we won't press you too hard because we don't want to get pressed back.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, but no, thanks. It was a good time.
Thanks so much.
Really awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.